The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the status of tribal infrastructure as it pertains to roads, bridges, and buildings. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, which comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Good afternoon. I want to extend a warm welcome to our witnesses. Thank you all for making the trip to testify for us, especially President Javier of the Salt River Pima Indian community of Phoenix. It's good to see you here, as usual. Today, we will be discussing a topic that touches every corner of Indian country, tribal infrastructure. Making sure tribes have the federal resources and support they need to maintain safe and functional infrastructure in the community is a key part of our federal trust responsibility. Modern and reliable infrastructure is also an essential element of tribal sovereignty, safety, and economic development. Indian country cannot thrive when infrastructure needs go unmet and construction backlogs linger over decades. Unfortunately, that is exactly the position we find ourselves in today. Roads in Indian country continue to rank among the most undeveloped and under-maintained in the United States. According to the 2019 National Tribal Transportation Facility Inventory, there are approximately 161,000 miles of roads and trails in Indian country that are in need of federal funding. This past Monday, there were reports of a flash flood that washed out a section of a highway on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota, which created a chasm that is 40 feet wide and 70 feet deep and resulted in multiple injuries and even fatalities. This kind of catastrophic flooding has quickly become the new normal as climate change begins to impact our everyday lives. Indian country, as well as other rural and minority communities, have always been on the front lines of climate change. But without strong and well-maintained infrastructure to mitigate negative impacts, Indian country will continue to disproportionately suffer as a result of changes in weather patterns and worsening natural disasters. Infrastructure investment is not only tied to the public safety of roads, bridges, and buildings on tribal lands, it also serves an important economic purpose in tribal communities. Without reliable transportation systems for community members and visitors, tribes may not be able to take advantage of economic development opportunities. Infrastructure investment also is a tool for economic development, establishing projects that create good-paying jobs located in and around Indigenous communities. Infrastructure improvement clearly belongs at the core of our priorities when it comes to honoring our trust responsibility and promoting prosperity in Indian country. That's why I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the unique infrastructure needs of their communities in addition to what we can do to help address them. I would now like to recognize Ranking Member Cook for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I feel like I go back in history when I was a young mayor. Oh, wait a minute. I was never young since I've been elected, but and we were talking about roads, infrastructure, flooding, and it's a situation which is very, very difficult to deal with at a local level. And when we're talking about Indian country, it's even more difficult because of the history, because of the records, because of trying to find that data so that you can have a battle plan, if you will, to fix some of these things is, at least in my opinion, just much more difficult. And it's an area that I think in Indian country, some of these things that the chairman was talking about have been ignored for a variety of reasons. And so I'm very happy that we're having this hearing here. It's very, very important. This is somebody that's been down this road before. It's difficult. You have to have a buy-in with multiple shareholders, and you've got to recognize that there is a problem. And I think we've taken the first step by having this hearing today, and we can get the funds and allocation to address some of these serious deficiencies that have been around for a long, long time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now I would like to transition to our panel of expert witnesses today. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the light on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before we start questioning. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Martin Javier, the president of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community in Arizona. President Javier has been employed by the community since 1996 and served as its vice president for 3 terms prior to his presidency. As someone who has actively engaged with the community for more than 2 decades, I am interested in hearing his perspective on the current state of community's transportation infrastructure. The chair now also recognizes, President Javier, why don't we go into your testimony first, and then I'll go down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak here this morning on behalf of our community. To start off, good afternoon. My name is Martin Javier. I am the president of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, located in the metro Phoenix area in Arizona. Where the community was once the outskirts of the Phoenix metropolitan area, today we are an integral part of the growing East Valley in Phoenix. The cities that border our community, including Tempe, Scottsdale, Mesa, are some of the fastest growing cities in the state. The tremendous growth is best described by the average daily traffic counts on the freeways and major roadways in and around our community. With 3 major freeways, the Loop 101, Loop 202, the State Route 87, nearly 400,000 vehicles pass through our community daily. Add to that an estimate 250,000 vehicles that travel on some of the large roadways in the community, such as the McKellips, McDowell, Pima, and Country Club roads. There are more than 650,000 vehicles that travel daily through our community. As you can imagine, this puts a tremendous strain on the community's public safety and public works agencies that are responsible for maintaining and keeping existing roadways safe for travel. Additionally, as the community continues to grow and expand, it must also expend additional resources to plan and build new roadways. Mr. Chairman, the bottom line is that the federal tribal transportation programs are significantly underfunded. For example, on an annual basis, our community receives $92,000 from the Bureau of Indian Affairs for road maintenance and is forced to supplement this funding by nearly $1 million. Further, the community's 5-year construction plan, the Bureau of Indian Affairs funding will provide only 13% or $1.5 million of that overall budget. Clearly, there is not enough money to meet the basic maintenance needs of our current roads, let alone the funding necessary to support a robust 21st century transportation system. As a result, we believe an increase in funds for tribal transportation programs will help tribes establish, maintain, and perpetuate tribal transportation programs. We also urge the committee to support additional set-asides in other federal transportation, highway safety, and related programs, as well as reduce the local match requirement for competitive grants to ensure federal funds reach Indian country. While our connectivity with other jurisdictions encourage economic development, it also creates unique negative impacts. Most notably, a significant number of vehicles use the community surface roads as an alternative to regional arteries. This cut-through traffic increases wear and tear on roads and creates the potential for safety issues in and around our residential areas. Currently, our law enforcement agencies work closely with neighboring jurisdictions to address safety issues, including reducing cut-through traffic, increasing lighting on secondary roads, and adding pedestrian facilities to improve crossing safety. Unfortunately, the tribe does not have access to most federal highway safety program and funding to support these activities. I urge the committee to review and consider the recommendations put forward by the Tribal Transportation Safety Working Group to help improve vehicle and pedestrian safety on tribal lands. Next, our community is significantly challenged with efficiently acquiring right-of-ways for priority projects. According to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, our community is one of the most highly fractionated reservations in the country. As a result, allotted lands have dozens and sometimes hundreds of ownership interests. This fractionation and the process of working to get landowners on right-of-way issues is further complicated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs regulations that are not very user-friendly. Mr. Chairman, the community, as a matter of policy and practice, believes in self-governance. We fully endorse the philosophy of removing the federal bureaucracy from tribal and federal programs and allowing tribes to directly use federal funding in the most efficient manner to meet the tribal needs. We are proud to say our experience with tribal self-governance compacting has been very successful and is a perfect example of the most efficient use of the federal dollar. That is why we support the effort to expand tribal self-governance capacity to all United States Department of Transportation programs as authorized by the FAST Act, and we are proud of the work that has been done on this initiative, which we hope will produce proposed rules for comment in the upcoming weeks. In closing, I am excited to report that our community was recently selected to receive a $49 million grant from the National Significant Federal Lands and Project Programs. The grant will support the Pima Road redevelopment between the community and the city of Scottsdale and improve safety, decrease cut-through traffic, and expand opportunities for economic development along major thoroughfare. I urge the committee to support these kind of large-scale grant programs that support projects like this on tribal land. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
The chair now recognizes Daryl G. Siki, Sr., the chairman of the Red Lake Nation in Minnesota. A Vietnam War veteran, what are you guys? Chairman Siki has worked for Red Lake Nation in various capacities for 40 years and has acted as chairman since 2014. Considering Chairman Siki's rich history of tribal council service, I look forward to hearing how he has witnessed Red Lake Nation's transportation infrastructure change over years. You may begin.
Anina kinimoy so in all basement just in the cause to remember cause on because in do them do bashing because I got in the donjiba kimi go nim no much about ganun and go in the issue ever can disconnect gonna no me guys gish on to boy my good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and all our friends here. My name is Daryl Siki Sr., Chairman of Red Lake Nation, Chimigwech, for this opportunity to testify today on behalf of Red Lake Band Chippewa Indians. Red Lake's 840,000-acre reservation is held in trust by the United States and is home to over 12,000 tribal members. The remoteness of our relatively large reservation, our lack of good roads, reliable communication system, and other necessary infrastructure makes it difficult to provide public safety services, promote economic development, create employment opportunities at Red Lake. I am here to talk about the BIA's failure to assist Red Lake in repairing our inadequate public safety buildings, our crumbling tribal road system. Red Lake has been tirelessly trying to fix the dilapidated public safety infrastructure on our reservation. Years ago, the BIA condemned its own law enforcement center at Red Lake, but did not replace it because of lack of funds. As a result, my tribe was forced to borrow $5 million in 2011 to rebuild it. This year, my tribe was compelled again to take out USDA loan to replace 2 dilapidated BIA fire halls. Replacement of these 3 federal buildings is responsibility of the BIA. But because BIA would not fulfill its trust responsibility, we had to. If the BIA will not provide funding to repair and replace its own facilities, it should at least pay a fair and equitable lease cost to the tribe. We ask for your assistance and support to obtain these lease agreements for BIA. Road construction, maintenance funding is another critical need at Red Lake. While our need for improving our tribal road system increases, the funding we receive has decreased. In 2002, through the negotiated rule-making process, tribes agreed that a needs-based formula should be used to allocate Indian reservations road funding to tribes. This funding distribution was in fact from 2004 to 2012. However, beginning in 2013 with the passage of MAP 21 and later the FAST Act, the distribution of tribal road construction funding shifted from a need-based formula to a population-based formula. This change has permitted funding intended for Indian reservations to be diverted to county, state, and other non-tribal roads over which the government has no trust responsibility, to the detriment of reservation residents where there is no viable funding alternative. Because of this shift, Red Lake has lost $6 million under MAP 21 and FAST Act, plus $4.5 million under the previous highway, for a combined loss of $10.5 million since 2004 in road construction funding. Yet this formula manipulation continues to be used by the BIA despite repeated demonstrations by Red Lake and other tribes of gross iniquities it is causing. Following extensive fieldwork, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights recently concluded that federal programs designed to support the social and economic well-being of Native American remains chronically underfunded and inefficiently structured. The Commission specifically identified reservation roads as one of the highest unmet needs. It is imperative that Congress recognize the inequities that persist in the BIA tribal transportation program, take steps to ensure these inequities are corrected. And Chimigwech, for your support of our most immediate needs at Red Lake Nation. These needs directly impact my constituents. We need this subcommittee to help us make the BIA live up to its trust responsibility. Chimigwech again.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Leroy Gishi, the Chief Bureau of Indian Affairs Division of Transportation. Mr. Gishi has worked with the transportation program since 1986 and has spent time in both its Navajo Nation and Western Region offices. As someone who has served in the Department of Interior for 30 years, I'm interested in hearing his insight on the current state of the BIA roadways and other maintenance projects that we've just heard from the chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gishi. Please begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Leroy Gishi. I am the Chief of the Division of Transportation, Office of Indian Services within the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of the Interior. Thank you for this opportunity to present the statement on behalf of the department at this oversight hearing regarding tribal infrastructure, roads, bridges, and buildings. Infrastructure continues to be a critical part of the well-being of tribal and rural communities. One of the many barriers to economic development in Indian communities is a lack of physical infrastructure. The Department, the Bureau of Indian Education, the BIA remain committed to improving and adequately maintaining tribal infrastructure to provide increased public safety, security, and economic development opportunities in Indian communities. Safe roads, bridges, and buildings are important when transporting and supporting people in rural areas to and from schools, and to local hospitals, and for delivering emergency services. I appreciate this opportunity to share with the subcommittee the status and need for tribal infrastructure improvement and maintenance as we work with tribal, local, and federal stakeholders in the implementation of the tribal infrastructure programs. The department, through the BIA, administers and partners with the other federal agencies in the implementation of tribal programs that support construction, reconstruction, improvement, repair, and maintenance of facilities such as roads, bridges, and schools. BIA, together with its partner in the Federal Highway Administration, oversees planning, design, construction, reconstruction of eligible transportation facilities through the Tribal Transportation Program. The BIA oversees the BIA Road Maintenance Program for the maintenance of BIA transportation facilities. The Surface Transportation Assistance Act of 1982 established the Indian Reservation Roads Program and funded with federal highway federal aid dollars. Since the establishment of the IR program, now called the Tribal Transportation Program, or TTP, and under subsequent transportation authorization, the total federal construction authorization for tribal transportation has exceeded $10 billion. The investments have contributed to the improvement and maintenance of roads, the replacement and rehabilitation of deficient bridges, and the creation or maintenance of safety and transit projects on or near tribal lands. The National Tribal Transportation Facility Inventory is the listing of eligible public transportation facilities which the TT funding can be expended upon. The NTTFI, as it's called, consists of over 156,000 miles of public roads with multiple owners, including Indian tribes, the BIA, states, counties, and local governments, as well as other federal agencies. We believe Congress has viewed infrastructure improvement as a joint responsibility, including not only federal agencies, but also state and local governments with transportation investments on or near American Indian and Alaska Native communities. There are approximately 1,000 bridges, BIA bridges across Indian country, and about 170 are considered deficient. Additionally, there are approximately 2,400 bridges with Indian country that are the responsibility of other public authorities, such as states, counties, and towns. Of these bridges, approximately 390 are considered deficient. Coordination among all these stakeholders is required in order to maximize available resources and address the regional transportation needs. The BIA and federal highways and tribes will continue to invest in transportation, the resources and transportation projects primarily that are actually the responsibility of other public authorities. Strengthening existing partnerships is a really essential part of continuing this process. An investment in tribal transportation is truly an investment in the local economy. Under the BIA road maintenance program, there is approximately 29,100 miles of roads that make up that portion of the larger 156,000 miles I mentioned earlier. Approximately 58% of these roads, BIA roads, are unimproved and earth roads, and 16% are gravel surface. The deferred maintenance that is currently been recorded at the end of FY 2018 is $390 million. In FY 2018, $32.6 million of tribal priority allocation funding was made available for the performance of road maintenance. The FAST Act, which was enacted back in 2015, provided not only a continuation of the use of the formula established under the MAP 21, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, but also continue to support the formula established under that enactment of that law. That FAST Act continues to provide new provisions for improvements of the transportation programs. One recently was the data collection on program activities. With this information that is required of all entities, that is to provide the description, the names, the status of projects and activities, along with the number of jobs created and retained. The reporting in the initial years has indicated that there are 1,500 jobs that have been retained and 5,000 jobs that have been created annually. This is based on 900 projects and active projects with a total cost of $2.7 billion. The department is committed to working with this subcommittee and others in Congress to address tribal infrastructure needs and share successes in Indian country. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I thank the expert witnesses for their powerful testimonies, reminding the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chairman will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. President Javier, thank you for coming. In your testimony, you mentioned inequities in passenger and pedestrian safety on tribal lands. What factors would you say most contribute to these inequities?
Sorry. What contributes to that is really what I mentioned earlier in the statement, is that the community is experiencing a lot of cut-through traffic. Our community, again, is located between the cities of Scottsdale, Tempe, Mesa, pretty much surrounded by the cities. Some individuals have found it faster instead of taking the freeway system, which also surrounds our community. It's faster just to cut through our community to get from point A to point B. The current concern is that with, again, the usage of the road, not being able to maintain it because of that usage, because of the funding we get, there's a concern also of those that come through are not obeying the laws of the community. There's a concern from our members of our community of individuals, again, just not obeying the laws and the fear of somebody's going to get seriously injured at one point.
As you've noted, your community's proximity to urban Phoenix presents unique challenges to your infrastructure efforts. Can you expand on what actual road maintenance entails in your community? What are the structural additions you need or are going through right now?
So right now in the community, and I'll just say up front, the community really receives a lack of funding from the Department of Interior. Right now, we receive $1,300 per mile per year for maintenance on our roads. Our staff tell us that it takes $10,000 per year to maintain the roads. So we're significantly underfunded as far as maintaining the road itself. But what we're also facing is because when our community was created, there was an allotment act during the Dawes time that created allotments which individual landowners now own property in the community. So right-of-ways, when development happens in maintaining our roads, if infrastructure needs to be put in, there's a cost to the tribe. Again, because of the money that we receive, the tribe has to forward and fund the cost of the right-of-ways for infrastructure in those areas. So there's a big cost that comes back to the community.
Moving on to Chairman Siki, you mentioned that the tribe took responsibility for fixing BIA structures by taking out loans because the BIA failed to repair crumbling infrastructure. How did this reliance on loans affect your community's economic development?
Well, the current buildings are dilapidated, the fire halls, and I'll give you, for instance, this past.
Can you check? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I'll start over. The current fire halls are dilapidated, and I'll give you guys a example. This past winter, in the cold winter, we had a fire at one of our buildings, the home buildings, the housing, and our brand new fire truck that's in those fire halls wouldn't start. So our staff called Alaskan Township, our neighboring town that lives nearby us, were called and they responded a lot better than BIA responds when we need help. And we have a fire department in another district in Panema, 35 miles away. They responded and they wouldn't help to put the fire out. That's just an example. Yep. And there's many things that are.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to cut you off, but I also don't want to go over my time, and I want to make sure I get a response from Mr. Gishi. Chief Gishi, in Chairman Siki's testimony, he mentioned the BIA failed to maintain public safety infrastructure. In your testimony, you stated that the Bureau of Indian Education and the BIA remain committed to improving adequately maintained tribal infrastructure. How do you explain BIA's failure to maintain tribal public infrastructure in light of what you just wrote, what you said in your testimony, and what Chairman Siki just told us?
I apologize. There are two funding sources that come to the Bureau of Indian Affairs through the Federal Highway Administration and one through the Department of Interior. For maintenance purposes, the funds that are provided through the Department of Interior appropriations, and that averages at about 29 to 30 million a year. From the Federal Highway Administration, which is a reconstruction and is also eligible for road maintenance, there's approximately $495 million. But the requirements that are associated with that do require more of the planning, design, those areas that are necessary for project improvement. So as you can see, the funds that are available for road maintenance are strictly for those things that are entailing, in a lot of the areas, primarily snow and ice removal. So there is a lot of effort.
So, Mr. Gishi, and hopefully at some point you could work with Mr. Siki to rectify the situation by what it means necessary there. But given the failure that I'm hearing right now to meet the basic minimum standards of maintenance, would you say there's more resources for tribal infrastructure is required or needed? So, Mr. Gishi, I apologize.
Excuse me, more?
The question is, given the failures that I'm hearing right now, would you say more resources for tribal infrastructure is needed?
In terms of resources, that's something that we continue, as we mentioned, our deferred maintenance, which is a measure of what is not completed at the end of each year in terms of road maintenance, bridge maintenance, and equipment replacement. That number is currently at $390 million. So that gives you an indication that there is continuing to be road maintenance issues out there on an annual basis.
Take that as a yes. Thank you. I yield my time to our ranking member.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the panel for being here. This is obviously a tough issue. Somebody in local government, I was mayor of a small town, and we started talking about transportation funds and infrastructure, and we'd get in a big hearing where they'd have a transportation, we had all the cities and everything else, and I used to beat up on the city of Fontana because Fontana got all the money and they would build all these Gucci bridges over the freeway while poor Yucca Valley got crap. And I would get excited about that. And I almost feel we're in a similar situation. And sometimes it's hard to get the attention the smaller tribes, the ones that are in a rural area. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's hard to get the attention of the BIA. And I know that we've had different legislation that has been passed, and one of the things I would at least like is that if a tribe is really having serious problems with a whole plethora of issues, that they call up you guys and gals in and say, hey, we need your help. Do you have a mobile training team that could come down here and help us organize our battle plan in terms of requests for funding for certain things? Now, oftentimes we couldn't afford the engineers or the lawyers or everything else. And by being proactive, I would like to see it where you go to the tribes at their request and say, hey, we got this expertise, we can help you, here's what we suggest you do, blah, 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 with a price tag behind it. And of course, the other thing is we got to help you in terms of funding some of these things here. And I think it's long overdue, and I think the president was absolutely correct in some of these outdated laws, the way that they were written, and they have got to be reviewed, they got to be brought up to date, they got to take all this prejudice that was built in there and make sure that we take care of Indian country so that it's fair and equitable for all the tribal members that are associated with that. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize the good representative from New Mexico, Representative Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. And thank you very much for all of you coming. I know you came a long way. Your testimony is troubling, to say the least, but I appreciate you coming and talking about it. As the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Broken Promises report does state, physical infrastructure and economic development in Indian country are reliant on one another. The federal government's failure to uphold the trust responsibility to tribes is illustrated in the underinvestment in tribal infrastructure, which has manifested itself in the broken roads, bridges, and inadequate public transportation on our country's Native American communities. The Broken Promises report also quotes the NCAI policy, the National Congress of American Indians Policy Research Center, stating this: underinvestment not only harms the social, physical, and mental well-being of tribes, but impairs their ability to thrive and ability to leverage economic potential and tribal members' participation in the American economy generally. The federal government has a responsibility to tribal consultation to find practical solutions for infrastructure development in Indian country. Again, I thank you for being here, and I have a few questions. First, Mr. Gishi. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Broken Promises report explicitly states that of the 13,650 miles of roads in Indian country that are owned and maintained by the BIA, 75% of which are unpaved, are the most underdeveloped, unsafe, and poorly maintained road networks in the country. This directly impacts tribal members' ability to go to work, school, hospitals in an emergency, and access the ballot box to vote. What is the BIA doing to address the concerns about the FAST Act's redistribution of construction funding from reservation roads to non-tribal entities, and along with the ranking member stated? Non-tribal entities like states and counties, or put another way, what has the BIA done to, number one, address the disparities in tribal road conditions resulting from the funding distribution, and two, to uphold the trust responsibility by consulting with tribes about the funding changes? So, both those questions, and important to note, were the tribes consulted before this went into place?
Thank you. Beginning in 2001, there was a process of negotiated rulemaking with tribes for the purpose of solely developing a formula for allocating funds to tribes. That process ended in 2004 with the publication of regulations that identified a formula, and that was done through, again, the negotiated rulemaking with tribes. Through a series of events, in 2012, it was a regulatory form. In 2012, Congress passed the MAP 21 Act, which is Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, and the formula then became, and was changed and became a statutory formula in which the funds are allocated based on a formula identified in Title 23. In that process, as was mentioned earlier, there was a shift of funding at various locations, including information that was frozen in the formula that was previously negotiated, and that's the formula that we continue to use today, and that is, of course, a statutory formula.
Thank you. I'll try to get, Chairman Siki, regarding your testimony that Red Lake had to borrow money to replace unsafe BIA buildings like a jail, police station, and fire hall, has the BIA, and you stated that they haven't, but I'll ask the question, has the BIA leased the new buildings you built for them, and how has that impacted the tribe?
Well, first, past May, we submitted a proposal to BIA under 638 for those police station and detention center and the fire halls. And they reviewed them, and they reviewed the fire halls, but they declined to do anything with the fire halls because they said the fire sprinklers were not in compliance with BIA. But however, those buildings are in compliance with USDA where we got the loans, plus the state of Minnesota. These are brand new facilities. They're up-to-date facilities. And they're all fire stations that we are vacating that are dilapidated didn't meet the requirements, but yet BIA paid for the maintenance and operation. What's the picture here? Why are they doing that? We've been punished for 500 plus years, and they continue to punish tribes. That's got to stop. And you, as Oversight Committee, got to push BIA to process the leases because these are brand new buildings. They're updated, they're handicap accessible, they're beautiful buildings, plus the police stations.
With your permission, Chairman, what can this committee do to help you get your leases approved?
You need to, because you're an Oversight Committee, you need to push BIA to get on their horse, comply with the trust responsibility they have with Native Americans. There are treaties. They're responsible to take care of tribes. That's what they're there for. But yet, they keep punishing us over and over and over. And tribes have to borrow money, what they're supposed to be doing. And then it continues.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield.
And thank you, Ranking Member, for allowing our members to go a little longer. Now I recognize the good gentleman, and I use that term very loosely, from Alaska, Don Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have mixed feelings here because the jurisdiction of this hearing is well received, but really it's supposed to be in Transportation Committee. And that's where we're going to work on it. I'd like to gather the information because I've been working on this issue. When I passed TLU, my bill, we had I think, better system that's in place. It was replaced by MAP 21, but there was negotiation. And so my one question is, Mr. Leroy, under the TLU versus safety, MAP 21, which is a better system?
Are you referring to the formula or
Yes.
the allocation?
Yes.
Well, the difference is the 2004 regulations was negotiated with the tribes, and the formula in 2012 is the statutory formula.
Well, don't you believe that negotiation is a better system of distributing money?
I think it's always a good policy to
Mr.
sit
Chair.
and work with the tribes.
Mr. Chairman, that's one of my big, because there isn't much done now in consultation with the tribes. And we had that in my bill was a formula. We could better serve the tribes in negotiation to do it. And, you know, I'm not going to pick on the BIA. One of our problems is that we haven't funded, the Congress hasn't funded the program as it should have been funded. And I think that's what we have to address. And I would make one suggestion to my three witnesses. You've got enough lawyers in this room to take and put a lot of kids through college. I'm saying write up the language you think could help you solve this problem And then we'll jointly, with this committee and the Transportation Committee, see if we can't get to the issue of this instead of just talking about it all the time, see if we can't finish this issue. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Young. I now yield time to Representative Soto.
Thanks, Chairman. It's always tough to follow the Dean of the House, but I'll do my best. You know, the irony isn't lost on me that the first roads, bridges, and buildings in North America were by our Native American tribes. And many of those roads and routes are still in use today. And yet we are here because the federal government is failing to help you all develop and continue to maintain those roads in the modern era. I want to welcome President Javier here. Thank you for coming. I want to welcome also Chairman Siki. Thank you for being here and for standing up for your people and Americans, our people. And I want to thank Mr. Gishi for being here and had a few questions. In your testimony, you mentioned BIA's deferred maintenance backlog, which reached $390 million in FY 2018. How does BIA plan to work through this maintenance backlog?
I apologize. There are two ways of addressing deferred maintenance backlog. One of them is obviously when a road is in deferred maintenance condition and needs maintenance, it has one of two options: to be either maintained or improved. The improvement aspect of this is what we identify as part of the Tribal Transportation Program. So those are funds that are provided through the federal aid program. On the other side is the road maintenance. So it's a process that has to be prioritized at a local level as to what those roads need to be. If they need to be improved, then that's the step that needs to go forward. If they need to maintain, then that, of course, is the options available.
Thank you. And how has this backlog already affected tribal communities on the ground?
It's affected the communities significantly. A lot of these roads that are identified in the BIA system of roads are roads in which, through the years, were either developed locally or as part of earlier efforts in resource management, in which, when those services left, those roads would continue to be there. They were not designed, they were not configured to support the traffic that is on them now, speeds and likewise. So the result of that is you have roads out there that are, as we mentioned in the testimony, over 70% of these roads are earth and what we call primitive or unimproved.
Thank you. In your testimony, you mentioned it's Congress's view that there is a joint responsibility with federal and state and local governments to invest in Native communities. What is the BIA's position on tribes investing in their own communities for transportation projects?
The BIA's position is that tribes have been investing in the transportation infrastructure because they have the ability to prioritize the roads on an annual basis, and they have the ability to make those decisions. And so the result of that is they are addressing the needs that come up immediately that they can foresee. And what that does is it puts priorities on certain roads and does not allow other roads to be improved or maintained.
So I'm glad that you believe that tribes should have tribal sovereignty and self-governance when it comes to infrastructure, but what about tribes who can't afford that?
The process of the program is that if tribes request the ability to take over the programs of the federal government, they can through Public Law 93638. If they do not, then that responsibility rests primarily with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for those tribes who contract with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and with the Federal Highway Administration for those tribes who contract directly with the Federal Highway Administration.
Now, we talked about 170 of the 1,000 BIA bridges being structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, and another 2,400 bridges within Indian country, within Native American country, which with 390 considered structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. What is the BIA's projected timeline to ensure that the 170 of its bridges are structurally sound and usable?
The number of bridges that have been improved over since Safety Lou was enacted, in which a set-aside was specifically established for the replacement of deficient bridges, has been very helpful. That number has come down from 25% to what we're looking at now at about 18%. The result of that is a dedicated funding source specifically for replacing, rehabilitating, or replacing bridges that are out there. So from that standpoint, we are looking at about $105 million backlog for bridges that that consists of those 170 bridges.
And can you give us a range of how much it would cost to fix a bridge? A range, lower and upper mean?
It's really difficult to, it's usually by square footage, location, and approximation to materials that are available, structural concrete, number of things. So I would not be doing justice and try to give an estimate of what that is.
Couldn't give a range, though, from lower to upper?
Well, when I used to do bridges, you get a 100-foot bridge, you're probably looking at around $300,000 or $400,000 to do that. Since then, it's probably doubled just because of the cost of materials.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Soto. Now yield to Representative Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Republican Leader Cook, and our witnesses for being here today. As a former chairman of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority's Finance Committee, I have quite a bit of experience in the cost of building roads and fixing bridges, and I would say that your estimate on repairing a bridge 100 feet long is probably a little still undershot at doubling what you said. But again, it's related to what you, how close you are to materials. Like my colleague from Alaska, though, we all know that it's been agreed upon as recently as January 2019 that these issues reside under TNI, that's the Committee of Jurisdiction. So, and not this committee, but it's a great place to listen to the concerns and work to find out what we can do to work together to get these resolved. I think this is an opportunity for us to work together. And again, Mr. Gishi, as a member of the Department of Transportation at the BIA, you have a great deal of expertise in these infrastructure issues. And as we've been talking about, there's about 140,000 miles of public roads in any country. Of those, about 29,000 that are responsible by the federal government, paved, gravel, and dirt roads, approximately 1,000 bridges. In your work, you have undoubtedly seen how development can be hampered by red tape and onerous regulations like NEPA and other various environmental laws. Can you help us understand the effects of NEPA and these environmental laws and how it costs the investment from the tribes to work on these roads and the government, what it costs to, how much it hampers those development costs?
Apologize. I think the most significant impact is actually the timing process in which the impact it is to the tribes and the communities, and actually even the BIA if they're doing it, the project in-house. It is a process that's is very lengthy. In particular, projects or roads in which they have not had any previous work performed on them, so it's a whole new process of starting from ground zero, and it does take time. We have projects that go as long as 4 to 5 years on the short end when we have to go through all that work.
Just for a point of clarity for the committee, the same laws that apply to non-Indian territory infrastructure also applies to Indian country territory as well. Is that correct? NEPA, Waters, Endangered Species Act, all of those apply to the tribal lands as well?
That's correct.
And so in a lot of these areas, are these areas that are most deprived from infrastructure, are they strictly on land or do they cross over interstate highways? I know in Oklahoma, which we have the second largest Native American population in the country behind California, I've done a tremendous amount of work working on the different reservations and nations where we've crossed over, and there's been a work together with tribal communities, county monies, city monies, interstate monies, state monies. So as our former Secretary of Transportation, who was probably one of the longest serving in the country, talked about, it was the various colors of monies to make these things work out efficiently and go. And because of that, we were able to get a lot done in Oklahoma. It was a new program, new pilot program, and it's something I would encourage us all to look at as an opportunity because, as you know, I think we have 39 nations or reservations or tribal entities in Oklahoma, and we've been able to work together with state, federal, local, and other folks to make things happen. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity. Again, I hope we gather great information here and get this over the transportation infrastructure, and that we get the opportunity to get this fixed. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hearn. Do you have some other topics?
The only
Follow up. You can follow up more questions.
Yeah, the only thing that came out of here, I think a lot of us want to pursue this And a joint hearing with TNI might be in order because we're crossing over different jurisdictions and everything else. We just want to solve the problem. So I'll throw that forward for consideration. And I think there were a lot of things that illuminated. We got a long ways to go on this, and I hope we have more hearings on this.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Yeah, this is definitely a start of a process, and I think the most important reason why we wanted to have a hearing here is because sometimes the focus in the Transportation Subcommittee is too much just, from the 1,000-foot, 10,000-foot level. We want to particularly have focus on Indian country to be able to start drawing out solutions and actually identifying problems so we could eventually turn this into legislation. And of course, that legislation would end up going through the Transportation Subcommittee, but the most important thing is obviously having knowledge first. We're going to do one more round of questions, if no objection. And let me continue with President Javier. In your written testimony, you mentioned that your tribe has right-of-way acquisition challenges and the relation to BIA rules regarding compensation and signatures. What do you think is the best solution to this?
Well, and I'm not sure what we can do with the current regulations that the Bureau has on individual ownership of land, but that's the, I guess, hardship that we're running into right now in development of our roads and home sites, is just the concern that the tribe, in trying to acquire rights away for development of infrastructure or roadways, has to compensate those landowners to get that right away. So it's another burden that's put on the community of trying to get development done, again, for the development of roads or economic development within the community. I'm not sure how we can get past the new regs that have been put in place by the Bureau of Indian Affairs as far as percentage needed for development. Right now, you need 100% sign-off for development on pieces of property. For example, we've been informed by staff an acre of land might have 100 people that might have interest in that piece of property.
Specifically talking about Latis in Indian. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure how many other tribes this affect, but, our tribe is an allotment tribe. I'm sure all other tribes that have allotments within their community are facing the same conditions, but anytime you try to do any type of development, there's an extra cost that comes to the tribes in trying to develop lands by getting those right-of-way access to properties to put improvements in.
In your testimony, you talked about how the tribe received a $49 million grant from the Nationally Significant Federal Lands and Tribal Project Program. This will be used to develop a project between the tribe and the city of Scottsdale, the neighboring city. Is this the first time a tribe has collaborated with the city for federal funding?
No, it hasn't. We've actually partnership with the city of the city of Scottsdale in the past, and I believe it was called the Tiger Grant back in the day, and we've applied for that grant along with the city of Scottsdale. And unfortunately, we never were selected for any of the grants at that time, but you're correct, and we did mention that in our written statement that we are one of only 6 grantees nationally, and we were the only tribe to be awarded funding through this grant. So we're really excited about the opportunity of receiving the funding. I really believe the relationship that we have with the city of Scottsdale on this project was very important in getting the grant. Also with the Maricopa Association of Governments, their role that they played of getting this grant. So we really look forward, again, we believe in getting this project completed. It will help not only in the economic development, but creating jobs, for safety. It'll help the cut-through traffic that's going through the community. So in receiving this grant, we're really excited about moving forward and getting this construction of the road completed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you have now yield time to Ranking Member Cook.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The President was talking about Scottsdale. And when I first went through that area, I won't tell you how many years ago, but it certainly did not look like, but it's very similar to California with growth, and now you try to keep up with everything like that, and you're in an even more difficult situation in terms of urban planning. Before, it might have been rural planning. And how we address that is going to be very, very difficult, but it's something we cannot ignore, at least in the West and maybe the North or what have you, but more so in those areas where you have this tremendous growth and it affects tribal areas. I want to come to your reservation, but I'm afraid to bring my wife because it's in Scottsdale, and I think we'd be broke after she shopped there for a couple of days. But this is something that we have to recognize, and I stand by my earlier comments that there's some larger issues here with transportation and everything else, but just from the standpoint of my personal edification and everything else, the hearing has been a success. Now we got to continue on this and hopefully solve some of these problems. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize Representative Holland from New Mexico.
Thank you, Chairman. First, Chairman, it sounds like such an easy thing to fix that we have uniform fire code inspection laws across the federal agencies. It just doesn't make sense that one agency would approve the fire system and yet another one doesn't. So that sounds like something that we should work on, and I'm sorry that that is what is holding you back. So thank you for sharing that with us. My question will go to President Javier. With respect to the $49 million grant that you collaborated with, if there are projects identified, does the tribe participate in the application process for federal grants when they're joining with states, cities, or counties? I'm not sure if you answered that yet.
So did we join with surrounding state, county?
Does the tribe participate in the application process for federal grants when they are joining with states, cities, or counties?
Well, I think the only grants that we've had applied for, like I mentioned earlier, was for the Tiger Grant, and that was with the city of Scottsdale. Again, the other area is the Maricopa Association of Governments, which they play a part in us, helping us receive the grants. So those are the two entities that we used as far as getting the current grant that we received, and I believe they were also part of the Tiger Grant application process.
Okay, thank you. And with the current funding levels you mentioned, it would take 59 years to pave the dirt roads in your community. What funding is this estimation based off of, and does it include maintenance costs?
So when staff identified, I guess, the unpaved roads in our community, the mileage that it came back to from staff was 52 miles of unpaved roads, and the estimate cost was $113 million. And the 60-year that we put in our testimony is based on the funding that we currently receive from the Bureau. If we received, I think, $1,100 a year to build a road, it would take us 60 years to build these 52 miles of unpaved roads.
Right. That sounds absurd, of course. Thinking that you can do anything with $1,100 or even $92,000 in 2019. So I truly appreciate all of you coming and commit to working with my committee members and the chairman to remedy this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Holland. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. We learned a lot about the current state of tribal infrastructure today. My hope is that BIA adheres to its commitments also to tribal nations by supporting their exertions of sovereignty in the development of infrastructure. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.